If you want 2019 to be the year that you really want to be, here's the secret of making it a great year. Every day, serve someone. Every day. Every day add value to people. Every day serve one. Every day live the intentional life of doing for others, sometimes what they cannot do for themselves. And if you will put people first and add value to them and serve them, it becomes absolutely amazing what you and I are going to have and achieve, how we're going to help people, and in return, how it comes back to us. Benjamin Franklin said this: "No one is useless in this world who lightens the burden of someone else." If you're helping someone else lift a load in your life, you become a very useful person. Mahatma Gandhi said that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. But perhaps on this kind of a theme, my favorite quote is from Albert Schweitzer, who said, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I do know. The only ones among you who will be really happy are those who have sought and found how to serve." Boy, he's right on. The happiest people are not always the most successful people, but they're the ones who serve the best. I've met a lot of unhappy, successful people, haven't you? But I've never met an unhappy person that gave their life of serving and giving and adding value to other people. Martin Luther King Jr. said, everybody can be great because everybody can serve. Only one time in the Gospels is it recorded that Jesus said, "Follow me and follow my example." Only one time. And that's when he was washing the feet, serving the disciples. And I just want to talk to you today about how you and I can just intentionally begin to do this, okay? In my younger years of forming myself as a young leader, I kind of thought that what leaders did was get everybody to join their team and, cast the vision. And so that's what I was doing. And then in about 27, I heard Zig Ziglar say, who became a great friend of mine. Zig said, "If you will help people get what they want, then you'll receive everything that you need in life." And when I heard that, I thought, I've got this turned around. I need to focus on people. I need to put others first. And if I help them, then all the stuff that I'm going to need, I'm going to get as a return. And about the same time, I read a book by Eugene Habacker called The Other Side of Leadership. He became also a wonderful friend of mine. And Eugene said in his book, "The true leader serves people and their best interests. True leaders are motivated by loving concern rather than personal glory." So if Jesus were here, and we would say to him, what's important, what he would say to us is, he would say, valuing people is important. And not only valuing people, but serving people. And he would just say to all of us, if you want to have a great 2019, value people, serve people. So we're going to look at a couple biblical examples here and kind of really get some good understanding under our belt about what does it mean to really intentionally serve people. The first story is where Jesus is going into the upper room, and the disciples are all arguing about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom. And not only who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom, but who's going to sit the closest to Jesus. And so they're back and forth, and they're talking, and basically, as Jesus listens, he realizes that what they've got is they got what he called horizontal thinking. They're thinking about, am I better than you, and where would I position? And he wanted to get them on vertical thinking, so he started talking to them, and the passage is on Luke 22, it's on your screen. Within minutes, they were bickering over who of them would end up the greatest, but Jesus intervened. Kings like to throw their weight around, and people in authority like to give themselves fancy titles. And then this is the key, here's the key phrase. It's not going to be that way with you. Let the senior among you become like the junior. Let the leader act the part of the servant. Now, who would you rather be? The one who eats the dinner or the one who serves the dinner? You'd rather eat and be served, right? Here he goes. But I've taken my place among you as one who serves. It's amazing, isn't it? Jesus, Son of God, has taken his place among us as one who serves. When you biblically begin to understand serving people, there are three things that you kind of understand and come to grips with. Number one is that a servant puts, first of all, service over status. Philippians chapter 2. Don't push your way to the front. Don't sweet talk your way to the top. Put yourself aside and help others get ahead. Don't be obsessed with getting your own advantage. And here's the key phrase. Forget yourselves long enough to lend a helping hand. You know what he's basically saying is, if you're going to really serve people, you got to forget yourself. Now, I know a lot of people, they're the exact opposite. They're full of themselves. You know people like that, huh? How many of you are sitting beside somebody just like that? Don't. And when you're full of yourself, when I'm full of myself, it's all I can think about is me. And the moment that it gets there, it's all of a sudden everything's going to be centered about who I am, where I am, what's happening to me. And we all have to fight that because we all are basically selfish. We're born selfish. And the illustration, in fact, I've used it here before. If you don't think you're selfish, just let me ask you a simple question. When somebody takes a group picture of you, and you see that picture for the first time, who is the first person? Huh? Who do you look for? I mean, first person. You go right to yourself, don't you? I mean, my gosh, you pass those other 7 people, you go, oh, there I am. And let me tell you what, if you look good, you go, great picture. Great. You've judged the whole picture on how you looked. You haven't even looked at the right. Oh, great. And if you don't look good, oh, come on, do it again. Take another picture. Everything is based upon, did I look good or didn't I look good? So this is who we are. One of the reasons why living an intentional life is so important is if we are not intentional, we will be selfish. You know, we got to work at this. If 2019 is going to be an incredible year, you're going to have to look at the year and say to yourself, what can I do to add value to people instead of what are people going to do to add value to me? What can I do to serve people instead of, I wonder who in this next year is going to serve me? We're going to have to do a complete mind shift in that whole process. Service over status. But a servant, secondly, puts character over comfort. In other words, they do the right thing whether they feel like doing it or not. You know, there are two kinds of people. There are the people that do what is right and then feel good, and there are some people who want to feel good before they do what is right. And if you want to feel good before you ever do what is right, you and I will not do a lot of things right because we'll let our emotions control it. But the moment that we say, no, I'm going to do the right thing, and then I'll let the emotion follow. Character over comfort. A couple of weeks ago, right after Thanksgiving, I was teaching on the Good Samaritan, the message on perspectives about possessions. And as we know the story of the Good Samaritan, the man was robbed. He was on the side of the road. He was half dead. The Good Samaritan went over and took care of him. Took care of his wounds, put him on his donkey, took him to a place to recover and paid for it, and took care. And the whole thing that is huge is that the Good Samaritan was willing to be inconvenienced. Now here's the key. If you and I are going to make 2019 a great year of serving people, let me tell you the first thing that's going to happen to you, the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to be inconvenienced. Because when you have to serve people, they don't do it on your time schedule. Mm-hmm. Now, in the Good Samaritan story, the priest and the Levite, what'd they do? They saw the guy that was robbed, half dead, and they saw him, and they went to the other side of the road, and they walked by, didn't they? They not only walked by, and they walked by as far as they could get from him. And you know why? Do you know why they didn't stop? They didn't want to be inconvenienced. They were going somewhere. They're going down to Jericho. And now let me tell you what. Because they were good religious people, here's what I'm sure they did. I'm sure they prayed for him. Yeah. I bet. Don't you think so? I think as they went on their own way, not taking care of him at all, they said, "Oh my God, oh Lord, help him, heal him, help him, send somebody to serve him. Oh Lord." Isn't it amazing? Christians can make prayer the biggest cop-out. Sometimes we need to kind of shut up and serve. Just shut up and serve. Character over comfort. And if this is going to be a year where you serve, I will promise you, I promise myself, we will be at times inconvenienced. We just will. And Jesus, he said, look, let me explain it this way. If you want to save your life, what do you have to do? You have to lose it. Yeah. And if you want to be lifted up, you have to humble yourself. And if you want to be the greatest, you got to be the servant. If you want to be first, you got to be last. If you want to live, you got to die. And I look at that and I say, well, I want to save my life. I want to be lifted up. I got all these things I want. And he says, well, you got to go to the other side. Another thing that servant leaders do is they put we over me. They think of the big picture. And they think of others, not so much of themselves. Okay, in John chapter 13, this is, okay, we got to camp here for a few moments. It's on the screen. Jesus knew that the Father had put him in complete charge of everything, and he came from God, and he was on his way back to God. So he got up from the supper table, set aside his robe, put on an apron, and then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the feet of the disciples, drying them with his apron. Now, we know this story. This is a story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Well, first thing that pops out to me is it's amazing. In the most difficult hour of Jesus' life, this is a crucial time. Literally, in just a few hours from this situation, he's going to be in Gethsemane. He's going to find out that he has to go to the cross, and he's going to have the Romans come and take him. He's going to go into mockery of a trial. He's going to be beat. I mean, he's coming into his most difficult period that he came on earth. And in his most difficult time, what is he doing? He is serving other people. Well, this is huge. And he takes a basin of water and he washes their feet. Now, interestingly enough, in the Gospels, there's only 2 times that a basin of water is ever mentioned, and it happens to be just connected, these 2 stories right here. Pilate, remember when the people brought Jesus before Pilate and were wanting him to sentence him to crucifixion? And the press kept they kept pressuring him. And finally, remember what he did? Finally said, okay, look, he said, I think he's innocent. I don't say anything wrong with him. But if you want to do this, then he said, bring a basin of water. And he took his hands in that basin of water and he washed his hands and excused himself of the responsibility of what he was about to do. Now catch me. I call this basin theology. Pilate took a basin of water and put himself first. Jesus took a basin of water and washed feet and put others first. That's the difference between how a Christ follower thinks and how a person who lives for self thinks. It's an entirely different world. And think about this. You talk about a great test as a servant leader. He's washing the disciples' feet, and as he's doing it, being God, knowing all things, he's washing the feet of one who will betray him, one who will deny him, who will lie about him and will curse about him. And every one of the people's feet that he will wash in his deepest, darkest hour will forsake him and run. And what's he doing? He's serving. He's washing their feet. Every year in November, we have this event called Exchange for Leaders. We go to a different city. It's an amazing event, and we give them leadership experiences. And so in November, I had them in Los Angeles. And one of the places I wanted to take them, I really wanted to open their eyes and really get them to see a pretty amazing story. So I took them to the Dream Center out in Los Angeles that is led by a longtime friend of mine, Matthew Barnett. And here's the story. This is a great story. Matthew Barnett decided to go to Los Angeles and care for the poor and give his life in the worst area of Los Angeles. A lot of drugs, a lot of poverty, a lot of crime. And he had no money, and yet he wanted to start his ministry there. So here's what he did. He literally on the sidewalk, on a busy sidewalk in this poor area of Los Angeles, he put a desk and a chair. He didn't have an office. He didn't have a building. And people would come by and they'd say, what are you doing? He said, well, this is my office. And I'm here to care for people and meet needs. Do you have something I can help you with? And people began to come around and gather around, and make the long story short. Now, this was several years ago, 20 years ago probably. Now, today, if you're in Los Angeles, the hospital in Los Angeles, you can see on the hill that City of Angels Hospital, now that's the Dream Center. And hundreds of drug addicts are taken care of and met. And he's done this incredible ministry. So I had all these leaders there to stretch their mind and stretch their heart a little bit. And so I had Matthew talk for a moment. And here's what he said. He talked about the fact that they were a bridge between people that were poor and had lost their whole dignity and value, basically. And they were the bridge to help them get back their dignity and value and their health and all these things. And then he said something very interesting about a bridge. He said, if we are to be a bridge for others to cross over into a better life, we will get walked on. I'm just letting you think about that for a moment. We'll get walked on. Okay. There's another passage of scripture I want you to look at, because we're learning how to serve so we can do 2019 better. Because I want you to see this passage, because when we serve others, here's what's beautiful. We serve Jesus. So you know the passage. Here we go on the screen. I was hungry, you fed me. Jesus is talking, by the way. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was homeless, you gave me a room. I was shivering, you gave me clothes. I was sick, you stopped to visit. I was in prison, and you came to me. Now notice the response of the people there. The sheep, here's what they're going to say. Master, what are you talking about? Now, these are the people he's just talked about. He said, I was sick, you visited me. I was naked, you clothed me. And so he said, you did this to me. And he said, Master, what are you talking about? When did we ever see you hungry and feed you? Thirsty and give you a drink? And when did we ever see you sick or in prison and come to you? Then the king will say, I'm telling you a solemn truth. Whenever you did one of these things to someone overlooked or ignored, that was me. You did it to me. Jesus values people so much that when we serve them, he takes it personally. Yeah. I run into people all the time. They'll say, John, I just don't feel close to God. I just haven't connected with God for a while. And they'll look at me and say, what do you think I should do? Oh, I said, that's so simple. My gosh, you gave me an easy one. Hey, just go serve people. Just go serve people. Because you see, every time you serve a person, you serve Jesus. You want to get close to him? You can feed him? You can clothe him? Come on. This is amazing. And what's incredible about the story is when Jesus is telling them this, they're looking at him and saying, when did we feed you? When did we clothe you? You see, they were doing some wonderful things, but you see, they saw the hurting people, but they didn't see Jesus. This is huge. So every day when I serve people, if I come up and hug somebody and just give them an encouraging word, I walk away and I say, wow, just hug Jesus. Yeah. So you say, well, I haven't been close to Jesus for a while. Go start hugging some people. I got 42 hugs with Jesus today. See, you're still trying to pray. My name's John. I'm your friend. One of the books that I revised about a year ago was Developing the Leader Within You 2.0. And one of the things I love about my writing anymore is I've written to the business and secular audience so long, and they know me now so well that I can get by with a lot of stuff. It's just beautiful. I can just be salt and light, and it's just I'm trying to be respectful and value everybody, but I just am slipping in all the time. Just the other day I was doing a Q&A with a secular business company, and then they mentioned, they said, well, now you're a person of faith. And how does that affect your leadership? Oh, I said, it's everything. I said, do you know everything I've learned about leadership is from the Bible? And they're all looking at me. You're kidding. Oh, I said, I'll tell you something that'll surprise you more. They said, what's that? I said, everything you know about leadership is from the Bible too. Yeah. It is. Oh, this is so huge. I said, you're good people. You just don't have a clue. But you're good people. You're good people. You're good people. I said, let me explain it to you. I said, any of you in the audience, give me any leadership principle that you just really love, that you just have bought into, that you practice. Just give me the leadership principle, and I'll tell you exactly where you can find that in the Bible. And they started giving me this, and I said, oh, yes, that reminds me of the story here and there. And then after a while, they just kind of they got real quiet.
I went back, and Jake, thanks for providing this. Albert Einstein's quote, try not to become a person of success, rather become a person of value. And I love that, Tracy, because, and I'm going to take a couple of minutes here, because I really resonate with John's lesson today, and I love how he shared it's a risky statement. When I first heard it, I was like, success is for everyone. And I made a joke here. Success all around. I'm buying success today. Let me spread it around. And we kind of laughed about that. Yep. But then as I heard John teach, I went back to my story. Mm-hmm. And I went back to a story that perhaps those of you that listen to the podcast, you're very familiar with. I truly joined John Maxwell's team on May 1st of the year 2000. Bankrupt relationally, bankrupt financially. I wasn't giving any money. I wasn't making any money. I had no generosity in me. I think I still had a spirit, an attitude of generosity, but I had very little. I didn't bring any relational equity to the table. Nobody gave me a great reference that got me in the door. I had to introduce myself to every soul on the team because nobody knew me. Mm-hmm. In other words, I walked into an environment and I didn't bring very much. And now look what this environment has given me. I've went from the stock room to now getting to co-own things with John, be the CEO for the last 12 years. And I did a lesson recently that just underscores that I do believe this lesson, success is for everyone. I did a lesson with several thousand of our coaches, our Maxwell Leadership certified coaches. And this was the lesson title, If It Can Happen to Me, It Can Happen to You. Mm-hmm. If I can do what I am doing today with as little as I brought to the table, then success can happen for you too. And I believe it's wrapped in these components of knowing your purpose in life, growing to your maximum potential, sowing seeds that benefit others. And Tracy, I know you have a story of extreme success. What I want to do here in this podcast is, one, make it believable. Success is for you. Mm-hmm. Success is for you. The second thing I want to make sure that we don't do is create a success gap. Tracy and I are at a perceived successful place in our life, and I don't want that to make success feel out of reach for you. Go back to the core definitions that John's given us. Apply that to you and begin, as Albert Einstein said, begin that journey of adding value, and success will follow. And so I sounded like I just closed the podcast right there, Tracy, and I really didn't. But that was so on my heart. I was like, I really want to get this out, because if it can happen to me, Mark Cole, I promise you it can happen for you too.
And I totally agree. And I love this lesson because it is both of our stories. And I feel like we can sometimes become numb to to people who are in a perceived position of success and think something magical happened for them or whatever. And really, it's just consistent, unseen steps that have been taken in a certain direction in the areas that John talks about here. Because I'm the same way. When I first found John, I was 21 years old. I had not been to college. I was seeking out John because I wanted to grow, and I heard he was the guy to learn from. And so in these same 3 areas, and I even broke them down into even 4, because he says success is knowing my purpose in life, growing to my maximum potential, and sowing seeds that benefit others. But here's how I hear it. When I first came to John, I thought he was going to teach me, Mark, I don't know what I thought he was going to teach me. Things I didn't know, things I couldn't even title, And what I heard was, number 1, I need to discover my purpose. Number 2, intentionally grow every day. Number 3, practice generosity. And number 4, add value to people. Guess what? I could do all 4 of those at 21 years old without $1 to my name. And probably that day I did not have $1 to my name.
Yeah.
And so I love that, because every single person, no matter what level of success you have today, as you're listening to this podcast, that you can do those 4 things today, no matter what age or stage you're in life today. And I love that so much.
Well, and going to that, I'm going to give a shout out to our intern, Kyle Reisig, that's in studio with us today. He's just come and helping us for a period of time in between classes at college. And Kyle was asking, I love this, an intern that is asking questions his very first week. He's not soaking it all in. He's engaging. He was asking me a demographic question of our podcast listeners. And then I gave him kind of what age demographic information that we have in our world. And he said, let me tell you this. More of the students that I participate with, that I go to school with, needs to hear what I'm hearing in studio today. He said, we've got to figure out a way to get this podcast into the next generation, into the college age kids, into the high school kids. And his point is because this will help us, he's in that age group, this will help us set the courses in life that will make decisions that will lead us to a greater life of success and definitely a greater life of significance. And then, Tracy, you come out of this talk and say, hey, for me, it was 21 years old. I was at this shaping age, this age to where I wanted to figure out what I was going to do when I grow up. And that's where you begin to set your course on these 4 attributes that you just shared. Love that.
Yeah, and you know what? Let me just say something before we aren't even to our first point yet, but let me just say, yesterday I was in the kitchen with my 16-year-old son, and I was making pasta, and you know how it goes with teenagers. The conversations just pop up when you're just doing regular life things. And it turned into a conversation very similar to this one, where he was trying to figure out something in his life, and he was processing it all in his own head. And he had said he had talked to some of his friends about it. And I had just said, buddy, you know what? This is the value of parents. It's not just to process it through your head, or other kids who are at your stage of life who can only see from 16 years old and less. Go higher. That's what the value of parents is. Talk to us and help us see, processing through maybe, how you can add value in a different way and get your eyes off of yourself. I love this statement. That it's not that you should be thinking of less of yourself, but think of yourself less. That's generosity. And so don't think less of yourself. I don't want you to think less of yourself, but sometimes we need to think of ourselves less and look at other people. And that's when we really start to get in this first point is, how do I know my purpose in life? And I feel like there are podcast listeners, because I know this was me too. And so I know you can relate to this. I don't know if this was you, Mark, but I just didn't know my purpose in life for a while. I felt like it was this big, huge, abstract thing. And so I just started growing and trying to be generous in spirit. I didn't have a lot of money to be generous with, but I tried to be generous in spirit with my time. I started to be generous with the way that I spent my time with people. And the more I did that, the more I discovered my purpose. And so do you have any advice for people who are at that place where they want to dive into growth, but they don't really know their purpose yet? That age group, kind of what you were talking about, might not know their purpose yet.
Well, it's so funny as you were saying that. I number one, I'm going to question 1 and question 2 right here about how do I maximize my potential, which is where he talked about growth, Tracy. And I'm sitting here and you're going, yeah, for a while I didn't know my purpose. I'll be honest with you. It wasn't until 31 that I even knew I was supposed to know my purpose.
Have one.
It wasn't until about 32 or 33 before I realized, hey, I've got a purpose too. And then it was a little bit later than that when I could state my purpose. So let's be really clear. People like Kyle in the studio today, Javon, all these young men and women that I get to interact with that's seeking purposeful things, I'm going, you guys have no idea. You're a decade, if not more, ahead of me.
Yeah,
because I'm 30 years old, bebopping along, joining John Maxwell's team as an entry level. And somebody said, what's your growth plan? And I went, I don't know. And then they said, well, what's your purpose? And I went, purpose? To wake up? To eat? To find somebody that likes me? I mean, this purpose question was so much bigger than me. Right. And so now let me tell you why I've got to link question, how do I know my purpose? And then 2, how do I grow to my maximum potential together? I have to do that. Because it was as I began to chart my course for growth that I began to realize my potential in life. I don't believe, based on my life, I spent 30 years living out a purpose, but guess what? It was everybody else's purpose for me. It wasn't my purpose. Yeah. And when you, young person, live a life, choose a career, and choose a relationship because everybody else in your life is pleased with that but you're on a train wreck. It's just a matter of time.
That's right.
Because the purpose has got to resonate within you deeper, that when all odds are stacked against you, you still chase your purpose. When everybody says, no, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard, you still go after it. That's what a real purpose is. It is defiable against all odds and against all affirmation and confirmation of those around you. So for 30 years, Tracy, I lived on purpose. It was just somebody else's purpose. It wasn't mine.
Right.
Well, my life train wrecked. And then I began to realize that I didn't need to just have a purpose. I needed to have my purpose. And when I began an intentional path of growth each and every year, for 3 years, I just grew myself. I intentionally pursued growth. And in that intentional pursuit, I'll never forget it, the end of 2002, in a cabin in Blue Ridge, Georgia, I'm reviewing how I've grown the last 2 years. I'm setting the course of how I want to grow the next year. And boom, it clarified for me what my purpose was.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you what that is because we're talking about it. And perhaps some of you are new podcast listeners and haven't heard it. It's not going to sound that profound to you. But to me, it's everything. My life exists to inspire and motivate people to help them reach their full potential. You know why I woke up this morning and didn't stay in bed? Because my life exists to inspire other people. I saw the podcast on my schedule this morning and I went, well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that today. Yeah. I know some things I've got to do this afternoon that are a little difficult. They're not in my strength zone. They're not in my skill set. To be honest with you, they're not in my appetite for my agenda. I'm going to do them. You know why? Because I exist to multiply, inspire, motivate, and inspire people to reach their full potential. I'm not doing it because my parents, my relationships, others around me want to do it. I'm doing it because it is what wakes me up in the morning. It's what keeps me up at night. And that was found by answering these questions. What is my desire? What are my talents? What are my opportunities? And I found answers to those questions by growing myself, surrounding myself in a growth environment, and writing out a plan for personal growth. For me, Tracy, the answer for those 2 questions were so symbiotic that I can't separate them in the answering.
And you know how, let me just tell those of you who are listening and you're aligning what Mark's saying up to your own life and you're trying to think, does that fit for me? Does that fit with what my personal life purpose is? And I would just say to you, when you are in that zone and you are growing in that zone, it is going to be, you will have hard times. It's not like it's just all smooth sailing when you're growing in your sweet spot and in your purpose. But there will be times when you'll feel like your hair's on fire. You're so outside of your comfort zone. But you will also at the same time feel so deeply fulfilled. So like Mark said, called out of bed in the morning. Sometimes I wake up at 3:30 in the morning and I check my phone on my night table. I'll turn it over and I'll see like what time it is. And I think, is it too early to get up yet? Yeah, my body probably, I know what I need to do today, and I probably need a little bit more sleep, but sometimes I'm so excited to get into my day. I remember my mom saying that. Like, I look forward to waking up in the morning because I can't wait to get into my day and what I do. That is somebody who is driven by purpose and every day getting up to do your purpose, so that while you might have days where you feel stressed or you might feel out of your zone or like your hair's on fire because you're so uncomfortable because you're out of your comfort zone, you're still your heart's on fire. You're excited to get up and get into it. And when you are in a growth environment where other people are in that same space, it even pulls you deeper. What's that quote? I'm going to misquote it, but John always says, like, when you're in the deep waters, it doesn't matter how deep you are. It's like once you go out of the shallow zone, it doesn't matter how deep the water is. Just keep going.
He also says, yeah, he also says, Tracy, he says that he doesn't wake up out of discipline. He wakes up out of anticipation.
Yes.
And I'm telling you, for me, that happened as I began to discover the return on personal growth and the clarity of a personal vision and purpose statement. And that anticipation, and that's what I really want you to have at the end of this, is this pursuit for growth, this pursuit for clarity in your purpose. Success will come with those things.
That's exactly right. And another thing I'd like to touch on, and I know this is something that's important to you, is practicing generosity. Yeah. And this is something that John does, I think, perhaps better than anyone. I mean, that's why he's a mentor to both of us. I am drawn in by John's generosity. He is just such a generous human being. And I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about his spirit of generosity. When you are around John, you just feel his care, his concern for you. You can tell he's prepared. He's looked forward. He's anticipated spending time with you. And that is something that, to me, draws me in. And I want to be like that. I want to make other people feel the way I feel when I'm with John, because he is so generous in his spirit. Can you talk a little bit about generosity and what that looks like for you in your leadership and in your personal life?
Yeah, and I can give you a funny story that just happened this past weekend. We're recording this now, and John and I were just traveling together. And and so this all backs up John's statement that I want us all to get, and I will tell you the story. But he said generosity is not a bank account. It is an attitude. And so many people think that when they reach a certain earning threshold, or when they pay off their car, their house, or when I start making real money, for all you college students out there listening, I'll start being generous then. Yeah, maybe. But it won't be because you got money. It'll be because you got an attitude of generosity. There's a big difference in a big bank account and people that have no generosity, and a small bank account with people that are abundant at everything that they do. John this week, and John's really taught me to, by standards, over-tip, over-express appreciation to those that are in the service industry. And so we were at a really nice hotel this past week, and the guy helped us with our luggage. He helped us with this. He did a lot of great things. And so I gave him a very generous, like, John Maxwell inspired tip. I mean, I gave him like a really nice tip for what he had helped me with that day. And the guy was just blown away. He said, Mr. Cole, thank you. We came down one day later. Mr. Cole, thank you. We came down the next day, and he said, Mr. Cole, you've just been so good, so nice. Thank you very much. Well, then I watched John slip over behind the car and slip him what I knew was a $100 bill. And he got back in the car, and I said, he remembered your name too. Why are you trying to get him to quit being so appreciative to me? He said, Mark, it just struck me. This is him. This is him. And I cut up with him, and we had this crazy sense of humor. But I was acting like he was trying to trump me and being more generous, you know. Out-tip me and get more affirmation from the guy that was serving us with our luggage and all that. And I said, John, why'd you just out-tip me? And he said, anybody that appreciates something so much as he did the first day we got here probably has a need, Mark, bigger than you and I could imagine. And I just felt compelled that I need to go double and triple what you had done for a guy that was showing that much generosity. And I went, golly, what a brilliant, I mean, I'm not making this just happened. What a brilliant attitude of generosity. John goes, man, this guy is so grateful. I bet you a little bit more generosity would go a long way in this young man's life. Because we're in a city that has truly been shut down until recently. If he's dependent on tips, he's probably accumulated a lot of bills. And my relatively generous tip to him inspired John to a greater letter of generosity, not because he wanted to outgive, not because he has a big bank account, but because he has a heart, a spirit of generosity. And Tracy, you said it at the beginning, and we're speaking in John's absence here, but I've never experienced the level of generosity that I see on a daily basis with John Maxwell, and I want to experience that.
I do too. And we can all start practicing that now. Even if you don't have money, the resources financially, you can start with your time. You can start with being generous with love and kindness toward people. That, not everybody's kind to people, especially, gosh, you just go out. There's a lot of angst with people right now because of those bills, because people haven't been able to work. There's a lot of angst in private lives. And so when you're generous with kindness to people, you can just see how they're taken aback and they're grateful for it. And so imagine if we're giving 2 and 3 times more generosity and kindness towards people,
right.
How that's going to be. I'll toss it back to you, but the last thing that I really want to share with people is the other day when I had a phone call with John, I would just want to share with our audience what he shared with me because it was greatly impactful for me and I wrote it down. And he said to me, Tracy, I have found that most people do better when they're believed in. He said, wow. I do better when people believe in me. And I've just found that most people do better when people believe in them. And he said, so I want to believe in people so that they can do better. And I thought that's a generosity again, but it's also valuing people. And what a lesson. And so I share it with you because it's impacted me. And that private conversation, I'm sure he said it to many people too, but I share it with all of our listeners because what a beautiful lesson.
Yeah, it's how successful people think. I mean, you're sitting here and we're truly, rightly so, taking a lot of time talking about success, but showing you how success is really all about others. It's really about significance. And we're taking a lot of time here at the end of this to show you how successful people think. And you don't gain success and then all of a sudden start thinking. You think your way along until you see that level of success. And so John wrote a book, How Successful People Think. In fact, Jake, I'd like to make that available to everybody. Let's put it in our show notes. We'll put a link. You go to that link, put in a promo code podcast, and we'll give you 15% off of this book, How Successful People Think. I want to give you that next step because listening to this podcast is one thing, but getting into your awareness, how you should be thinking is truly one of the first and major steps on your way to a successful life, on a way to successful decisions and processing life from a successful perspective. So I want you to take that book and get it because, again, we're talking about generosity. We're talking about John. You quoted John, gave us an experience of John, Tracy. There is this unbelievable sense of fulfillment that will come to you as you realize that your life has substance, that your life has significance, that your life is successful. And we want you to have that here. That's our passion. I love to share a podcast comment from a listener that said, this is actually from Lena. Lena also, a few weeks ago, I referenced somebody from episode 200. It was a good lesson. We want you to listen to that. We'll put it in the show notes. But Lena was listening to episode 200. And she said, hey, thank you so much for the link to the 21 laws. I've been listening to this podcast while posting payroll every Wednesday. And I've been doing this every morning for the last 3 years. I can't begin to count how many changes, small and big, I have made in the last 3 years that has been directly influenced by the podcast. Thank you.
So let's look at crisis leaders and what they do really well. I was listening the other day to a podcast by my friend Gary Chrishell, terrific leader. And he said something that I'm starting my main teaching off of. He said, you don't motivate through a crisis. You lead through it. He's exactly right. If we have motivational gifts as leaders, it's not going to work right now. We're going to have to day by day, not just give happy cliches and try to make everybody feel good. We're going to have to day by day walk with people through very dark, difficult times. And so I began asking myself, how do we lead through a crisis well? What do great crisis leaders do? And this is what I'm going to share with you. Number one, and they're not in any order of priority, it's just number one. Crisis leaders understand context. Now, of all the things I'm going to share with you, this could be the most important, but it also is maybe the most difficult, because when I began talking about how to understand context, this is not an easy thing to teach, but let me try. I'm going to give you 3 words that I think help me define what I mean by context. Those 3 words are awareness, anticipation, and agility. Lewis Carroll said that if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. Well, in a crisis, here's what happens. We know where we'd like to go, but the roads that we want to take, they're blocked. Our usual path of solving problems, our usual path of going from one place to another, it's blocked. In fact, you know what you see in a crisis? The sign you see in a crisis more than the other sign is the detour sign. All the time you're saying, well, I've always done it this way. Oops, I can't do it this way this time. I've got to take a detour. Well, I've always fixed the problem this way. Well, there's a detour sign there. Now, because of that, it's very important for a leader to constantly be aware of everything around him or her, and to constantly sense and anticipate, be intuitive, and to be agile. Let me define the difference between putting together a puzzle and trying to figure out a crisis. You know, if somebody put a 1,000-piece puzzle in front of us, what do we do? What's the first thing we do? Well, the first thing we do is not try to put the puzzle together. The first thing we do is we look at the top of the box that has a picture of the puzzle on it. And the picture of what we're trying to achieve through putting the pieces together is before us. It's clear. And what do? As we're putting the pieces together, we keep looking at the picture in the puzzle, because it tells us what to connect and what makes sense. And the picture is our North Star. It's our guide that helps us put the puzzle together. So a puzzle, here's what happens. You see the clear picture and then you begin. That describes life in good times. When times are going well and good for us, the picture's pretty clear. We know what tomorrow looks like. We're pretty certain what the next week, 2 weeks, a couple of months are going to perhaps be. But in a crisis, everything is turned upside down. Here's the difference. A puzzle, the good life gives you the clear picture, and then you put the pieces together to match that picture. You just keep looking at the clear picture. That's your guide. In a crisis, you don't get a picture. There's no picture right now of what's before us. All of us have uncertainty. I have uncertainty when people say, well, what do you think is going to happen? How long is it going to last, John? I have no idea. I don't know. I know humanly, I don't want it to last very long, but I know realistically, it's going to last longer than I want. But here's what I know. In a crisis, you have to begin. And as you begin, you slowly find the picture. But in a puzzle, the picture is clear and it's all complete. In a crisis, as you begin, the picture begins to form, but it's not a complete picture. You see a little piece of it. Okay, I got that. That makes sense. But the key of getting the picture to be clear in a crisis is movement. We continue to go forward, and the picture becomes clear as we move. That's why in leadership communication, which I'm going to talk to you about a little bit later, but that's why in leadership communication, this is key. When you sit down and talk to your people, basically your communication as a leader is something like this. Our next step is to take the next step. We aren't able to give 5 steps out. We don't know 5 steps out. And we constantly are saying, well, let me say, what we do now is what we can do Now, several years ago, I was, when I wrote the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, the generals asked me if I would, of the armed services, asked me if I would spend a day with them, working with them through the 21 Laws of Leadership. And I said I would be glad to do that. And it was a great experience to be with them. And they shared with me, they said, John, if you'll give us a day on the 21 Laws of Leadership, we promise you that there's going to be some good things happen. And so I did it. And the good thing that they said would happen was that the fact that they said, we're going to let you get up in an F-16 plane, and you're going to get a fly in one. And oh my gosh, that was huge. And so I went over to Jacksonville where we were going to do the flying, and I had a couple of hours of testing, and they took me out to my plane and it had my name on it. It was the generals had done me well, and my pilot. I mean, this is beautiful. My pilot's name is Buck. I mean, this is just the way it should be. They put Top Gun music on as we're kind of working our way out to take off. And one of the things that day, I spent the day with Buck, not only flying, it was an incredible experience, but afterwards we had some time together. And in spending my time with him in that process, he's told me that fighter pilots think in terms when they're out there and they're working and they're doing things. Fighter pilots think in terms of what they call the OODA loop, OODA. And those four letters stand for observe, options, decide, and then act. And what he was basically saying is, as fighter pilots, we're constantly observing. We're constantly looking for the options that are around us. We're making decisions, have to make sometimes very quickly, and we have to act. And when he was telling me that, that's the best way I can talk about context leadership. It's the fact that we're always observing, we're always looking at the options we have, and we hold the decisions and the actions to the last possible moment so that we can get the clearest picture. So I would like to give you 3 contextual words. I've already mentioned them, but I'd like to take just a little bit longer now to drill them home. The first one is awareness. And awareness is all about openness. It's all about understanding, looking around, understanding all the things that are happening right now, and you begin to integrate them into your leadership mind, into your leadership heart, and you begin to put all those voices that you're hearing. You're hearing a lot of voices, and by the way, you're asking for a lot of voices. You're wanting your leadership team to talk to you. You want their perspective. You want their thoughts. You want their opinions. But contextual leadership is the fact that I just don't buy into one thought or one opinion or one perspective, but I hear them all, and I'm probably going to integrate them. And it's not going to be just one voice that I heard or one perspective that I thought was perhaps good. It's going to be a blending of all of them. But to be honest with you, one of my frustrations with TV media is the fact that so much of it is just from one perspective, and it's not complete. It's not mature. Contextual leadership is the ability to see the big picture and hear many voices, but integrate them in such a way that you have one voice. Okay, that's hard to explain. I hope I did a decent job with you. The second word, anticipating, that's all about trusting your intuition. And during a crisis, you should trust your intuition more than any other time, because you have to be intuitive, because you don't have all the time the facts before you, the picture clear before you. And I tell leaders all the time, especially gifted leaders, the edge that they have is that they have a sense of intuitiveness and they have a sense of timing. And those are both absolutely huge. So, when I'm contextualized as a leader, I'm aware of everything that's happening. I'm intuitive, and as I'm aware, I'm listening to what I sense and feel within me. And then agility is the last word, which means that I'm able to be flexible. I'm able to change direction. That yes, I have plan A, but I also have plan B. And I tell you, during a crisis, you better have plan C, you better have plan D. E's going to help, and maybe if you can get an F and a G, you're going to even be better off. So great leaders, crisis leaders, what they do really well is they not only see the big picture, but they use the whole picture to be integrated into who they are and what they know about leadership in such a way that when they lead with a maturity, a fullness that really covers what needs to be covered in leadership. That's number one. That's crisis leaders do that well. The second thing crisis leaders do well is they embrace good values. In fact, crisis leaders lead by values, not by pressure. As I've looked at where we are right now, and every day I'm talking to leaders, every day I'm having leaders ask me questions. I've did a mentoring call earlier with a few hundred leaders today. And one of the things that's very obvious to me, and I'm sure it's obvious to you, is there's a great amount of fear during this crisis. And let me just say this is a very severe crisis. A lot of bad things are happening. So in no way do I want to diminish the seriousness of this crisis. And I certainly don't want to diminish at all the fact that there are people dying. And this is not an easy time for any of us. Having said that, I ask myself, why is fear so dominant also? Because I happen to believe that fear makes a crisis much more severe. In fact, I know that for a fact. So however severe this crisis is, the fear that we have and the fears that people have, I can promise you, it's going to increase the crisis and make it worse. So the question is, why is fear so dominant? And I think that there are, as I've studied and reflected, there are two reasons. Number one is we live in a dysfunctional culture, no doubt about that. But as I speak of the dysfunctional culture that we live in, we live in two generations of dysfunction now. So when we had a first generation of dysfunctional behavior in people, it didn't get into the leadership world so much. But in a second generation, now you have leaders who've grown up in dysfunction themselves. So the good news is they have some leadership qualities. The bad news almost always is they don't have the emotional stability and strength to always lead well. So fear is, I think, rampant because of this dysfunctional culture. And the second thing I think about fear is the fact that we've lost our way. We've lost our values. And because we've lost our values, which are anchors, they're pillars in your life and my life, because we have either lost our values or we have lost good values. Because of that, we're having a lot of fear. Let me illustrate. George Barna came out with an interesting article recently on the values that people have today. And I don't have all of them in here, but I'm going to give you 9 very quickly. Acceptance, comfort, control, entertainment, entitlement, experiences, expression, freedom, and happiness. Now, those are the values of today. And when I looked at the values of today and I look at the crisis that we're in, I think, oh, we're in trouble. I mean, if your value is comfort, you're in trouble. There's nothing comfortable about quarantines. If your value is control, this one's completely out of control. If your value is, I just want to be entertained, well, we lost most of our entertainment opportunities. We can't even go out. And if it's entitlement, another value today, well, I'm just entitled to what I have. Well, can I tell you something? What you have is being taken away from you, and it's being taken away from me right now. And if your value is freedom, well, we've kind of losing that in this crisis. And if it's happiness, there's a whole bunch of people that aren't too happy. Now all I'm just saying to you is, if these are the values that Barna says we have today, no wonder there's a lot of fear. No wonder there's a lot of unhappy people, because most of the values that people have today, wow, they're not good, solid values. Let me just compare that with solid values. And I understand this because in our John Maxwell Enterprises, we have the privilege of bringing transformation to countries invited by presidents and leaders of the country. And we do it through teaching values in what we call transformation tables, small round tables. Now compare the values of comfort, control, entertainment, entitlement, happiness with these solid values: attitude, courage, responsibility, commitment, integrity, humility, hope, gratitude, kindness, perseverance, teamwork, self-regulation. Now, let me tell you something. Just as we were putting a lot of red check marks about the attitude or the values of people today that aren't going to last in the crisis, you can put a check mark beside every one of those values, and they will be an asset, not a liability in the crisis. You see, moral courage is doing the right thing in face of your fears. But when you have good values and you're bigger on the inside than you are on the outside, it allows you to do exactly that, to do the right thing in the very face of your fears. Do we have fear? Of course we have fear. I have fear. Everyone has fear. There's no such thing as a person that's fearless. I mean, they're disillusioned if they are. They're delusional if they are. But this issue of having moral courage and doing the right thing in spite of fear, it's all based on values. And one of the reasons that fear factor is heavy right now is because of that we've kind of lost our way in values, and we emotionally become quite a bit dysfunctional. But good crisis leaders, they embrace good values. Pat Lencioni, I heard him on a podcast the other day, and he has a new book called Motives. And he said something very interesting. He said there are two reasons people lead. And I found that interesting because I'm always asking people, why do you want to be a leader? He said, there are some that lead because of the reward that they're going to get through leadership, and there are some that lead because of the responsibility they feel about leadership. Well, if I'm leading because of the reward, it's all about me. And if I'm leading over responsibility because of responsibility, it's all about serving you, putting you first. And what values do for us is values hold us stable and help us to be responsible in our leadership. Okay, here's the statement that I wrote down in my notes that I want to give you because I think it's just good. Be the leader for others that you wish that you had. And I know what kind of leader you wish you would have. The kind of leader you wish you have, the kind of leader I want to have, are leaders that value people, that put the people first. That's a fact. So let's go on. The third thing that crisis leaders do is they communicate effectively. And they effectively communicate several things. One, they effectively communicate reality. Max Dupree said the first responsibility of a leader is to define a reality. And what I found is that when I'm talking about me now, when I argue with reality, I lose 100% of the time. I always lose because reality is truth. Now, let me just say something about leading with reality. When we think of a leader that's a realistic leader or leads with reality, we normally say, well, this is a leader who can help us face difficult times. And we connect reality with hardship and bad times. That's not necessarily reality. I can give you reality that I think to an extent could be comforting. For example, I can tell you that the crisis we have, although this is a severe crisis, it's not the worst crisis that we've had. Not at all. It's not even the worst flu crisis we had. Just go back to the 1918, the Spanish flu. Millions of people died with that. I can give you reality. This is just as realistic as can be. We're going to get through this crisis. Yes, we are. You say, oh, John, how can you know that? Because history tells me that. History tells me that men and women have gone through worse crisis than they are going through right now, and they got through it. So as a leader, if I'm going to communicate effectively, I'm going to have some realism in my communication. And secondly, I'm going to communicate frequently. And why is that? It's because in a crisis, things are changing all the time. I was doing some mentoring to Mark Cole, our CEO of the John Maxwell Enterprises, who does such a great job. And I said, Mark, one of the things that you're going to have to make sure our people know constantly is that as you lead today, tomorrow you may have to lead a little differently. Because the changes are coming so quickly that there are some changes that we don't know until we see them. And then all of a sudden we say, okay, now I have to adjust. Again, I have to be agile. I was talking to Casey Crawford, who's the founder and CEO of Movement Mortgage, a fabulous friend and a great leader. And we were just talking on the phone the other day, and he was telling me about at Movement Mortgage, how they're communicating. He said, we're communicating every day to our people. He said, every day we're through social media, we're communicating. And he said, we're explaining to them several things. He said, we're explaining to them what's happening. Oh, this is what happened since we talked yesterday. We're explaining to them issues that are arising. Oh, and by the way, last night this issue arose that wasn't an issue until last night. He said, we're explaining the decisions we're going through. Hey, now we made this decision. Let me explain to you why we made this decision. Now what's he doing? This is great communication. It's not only frequent, but it's intimate. It's opening up the door and letting people see on the inside, letting them share and find from you kind of the struggle that you're going through. The third kind of effective communication is just communicate with care. It's been very interesting. I've watched Andrew Cuomo, who's the governor of New York. I've watched him not a lot of times, maybe a half dozen times now, when he was communicating, obviously, to the people of New York and specifically to the people in the New York City area, which is just incredibly sad what they're going through. And but he's a very good communicator, and he's a very good communicator in a crisis. In fact, just to be honest with you, just from just my perspective, I'm looking at him and I'm thinking, wow, wouldn't the Democrats maybe want to have him to run for president? I mean, he seems to be able to communicate during a crisis very well, but he closes his time with personal thoughts. And the other day he talked about his brother that has the coronavirus, and it was so touching. It was so personal. It was so warm. And I thought, oh, he's closing the gap between himself as a leader and all of his entire audience by saying, hey, look, my brother's infected with this. It's coming home. And that's great communication. That you communicate the reality. That frequently you're letting them, but you communicate at all times. Communicate care, and the fourth thing that you communicate effectively is put we in the picture, not you and me, but we. It's the real corny story of two guys on one end of the boat, and on the other end was a big leak, and the people at the other end were trying to bail the water out. And the two guys that are furthest from the problem, and one guy looks at the other and says, boy, I said, I'm glad that hole isn't on our end of the boat. Well, bless his heart, he doesn't understand that we're all in the same boat. And we equals, it equals community, it equals team, it equals partnership. And I tell you, we're entering into a time of what I would call mass collaboration. And the more that we come together, in fact, I want to stop here and say that I think that as this crisis worsens, I think we're really going to see. I think we're going to see Americans get better. It's a terrible way to look at it, but I'm seeing them come together. I'm seeing them care for each other more. I think that one of our major problems in our country over the last few years has been partisanship. Democracy doesn't work really good when it's us against them. It only works good when both sides of the aisle and as politicians come up and talk together and work together. Democracy works best when leaders are contextual, like I talked about in the better, where they take all the thoughts and they bring them together to get the best thoughts, where they have shared thinking. And I just think that that as you're communicating, don't look and say, boy, thank God I don't live in New York City. Our area is not affected like that at all. No. If the hole's in the boat, we all go down unless we all work together. But I think people are more resilient than they think they are. I think they're more creative than they think they are. And I think they're more generous than they think they are. And I think that this crisis right now is going to maximize those good qualities in people. I think you're going to see more and more every day people doing better while the crisis, even at this time, gets worse. Which brings me to the last way of communicating effectively, and that is just to communicate hope. Back to Cuomo just for a second. The other day he was talking, and of course New York City has been hit the worst in the country. And he said, let me tell you why I'm glad to be a New Yorker. Oh, I love this. And then he talked about the fact that New Yorkers have already proven we can get through the tough times. And we got through 9/11, and we can get through this. But let me tell you why I'm so glad to be a New Yorker. And he just lifted the spirit. He communicated and he gave hope at the same time. Eleanor Roosevelt said, good leaders inspire confidence in the leader, but great leaders, what do? They inspire confidence in the people themselves. I love that. Winston Churchill, there's a leader that could lead in a crisis. I love the Churchill bunker. I just love that man. I think he was an incredible leader. During World War II, now I just referred a moment ago when I was talking about New York City of 9/11. Let me put this in perspective. Winston Churchill during World War II went through 51 9/11s. And what did he do after the bombing? Comes out of that bunker. Next day, goes right to where the bombing was, where buildings are flattened, smoke ascending, just horrible conditions. And he's walking among the ruins and the rubble, smoking a cigar, looking right in the camera, letting the camera picture all the bad stuff that's happening. He's flashing the victory sign. And he's basically saying, guess what? We got hit last night, but we're still standing. We got hit last night, but we haven't surrendered. We got hit last night, but we haven't lost hope. No wonder Winston Churchill would say, courage is going from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. I love that. Number 4, crisis leaders think creatively. Crisis leaders believe that there is always an answer, and let me underline the word always. You see, we all have fear. I have fear, you have fear. That there's no such thing as a fearless person. But let me just describe the difference between good fear and bad fear. You see, if I have a good fear, in other words, I fear what's happening around me, and I see what's happening. It's not positive. If I have a good fear, it causes me to prepare. If I have a bad fear, it causes me to avoid. Those two fears are poles apart. And crisis leaders, they have a good fear. And that fear causes them to think, to prepare, to start to become creative in the midst of surrounding problems. Chuck Swindoll, wonderful friend, oh my gosh, what a great guy. He said, we are all faced with a series of opportunities that are brilliantly disguised as impossible solutions. You see, every opportunity is surrounded by a problem. It just is. You don't go up to an opportunity and not have to go through adversity or difficulty. And so a great leader, they think creative. They look at the crisis we're in and they ask this question. In fact, I was in a conference one time, and we're doing a Q&A, and I had a person in the audience say this to me, and I loved it so much I stopped him and put it on my iPhone so I would never lose the quote. He said, my wife and I and our leadership team, when a crisis comes or something really difficult comes our way, he said, the first question we ask each other is, what good thing is going to come out of this? Now, that's a person who is a crisis leader, who thinks creatively. There's always an answer. What good thing is going to come out of this? I want to encourage you as we look, and we're surrounded by the coronavirus, and we're surrounded by, it's not getting better as I'm teaching it right now. what good thing is going to come out of this? Trust me. If we have a good fear, we're going to find the good things that can come out of us, good things about ourselves, good things about our team. If we have a bad fear, we're going to avoid it and stay away. You know, Carly Fiorina said, fear hides possibilities. That's so true. Fear hides possibilities. Fear, worry. Yeah. Worry, if you're a gardener, let me describe what worry is. Worry is like, if you're a gardener, like going out and fertilizing the weeds. If you went out and saw somebody taking fertilizer and fertilizing the weeds, you'd run up to them and say, wait a minute, what are you doing? Those weeds need to be pulled out of the garden. They don't need to grow. They don't need to take over the garden. We would say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. That gardener's over there fertilizing weeds. Can I tell you something much worse than fertilizing weeds is people that are fertilizing negative thought, worry, and fear in their life right now. It's only going to grow. It's going to consume the garden of your mind. So what I want you to do is ask yourself two questions. I'll give you the two questions that I want to talk about just very briefly. Question number one is, what would I love to do right now since I have more time? That's a great question. I mean, aren't there things that you would have loved to do and you just didn't have time to do them? I think we're all there. And the question number two is, what should I do now that I have more time? Now, that's a different question. I'll come back to that, but let me just talk to you about what would you love to do that you just love to do it, but you just haven't had time. I mean, for me, right on my desk, right over there, I can get, let's see, I got 6 books. 6 books that I just wanted to read. I've had them kind of waiting for me, and now I have the time. I'm going to read those books this month. How about friends to call? I mean, you know, I every day on my phone, every day I put down people that I need to call to touch base with you, or perhaps people that I can add value to. I thought about you all day today about adding value to you, and for me, one of the things I just would love to have a little bit more rest. I keep a pretty fast pace, and I get that time now. I'm getting to rest. Now, the second question, what should I do now that I have more time? Well, let me just say this. Okay, here I've written down 3 things for me: exercise and diet. That's one. I put them together. Clean out my closet and clean my office here. I really don't want to clean out the closet. Need to. My office is in really good shape, but I just really need to, there's just some filing, some things I need to do. I haven't done for a long time. I need to do exercise and diet. That's always a challenge. But for me, one of the reasons I've always said as a quote excuse, remember the worst excuse is a good excuse. One of the things I've always said is, well, it's hard for me to do that when I travel so much. Well, no travel now, John. Hey, your favorite excuse has just been shot. So here, let me just say this. Especially when I look at what should I do now that I have time. I think when we're through this time of quarantine and the crisis kind of eases up, I think there are going to be some people that are going to be very fulfilled in the fact that they took the very best use of the time they had at home and maximized the return for it. And then I think there are others who are going to say, wow, I didn't really maximize my time. What I'm saying to you is just very, very simple. Opportunities, they're never lost. People say, oh man, I lost that opportunity. I said, no, you didn't lose that opportunity. I said, somebody found it. Somebody always finds it. And so when you look at the opportunity, you're always going to see the problem, but you got to get through the problem so you can get to the opportunities. And great leaders believe there's always an answer. And they do a lot of good creativity. Number 5, great leaders embrace technology. Now, obviously, I don't need to say much about this, but technology is right now king because we're able to touch our people through it. I'm touching you right now through it. When we canceled our John Maxwell team, our coaches conference in Orlando, 3,500 people were going to come. We asked ourselves, what should we do? And so what we decided was that on March 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, that we would go online. And in the beginning, we were just going to go online to our coaches. And then we said, wait, let's go online to a lot of people. And over 1 million people joined us. It was all because of technology. And it wasn't interesting. We went from 3,500 people that we touched it without that technology to 1 million people. Now, I'm going to get out of that because that's not my strength at all. I have great people around me to do technology, not me. But let me review quickly. Crisis leaders do, we shared 5 things. Understand context, embrace good values, communicate effectively, think creatively, embrace technology. Number 6, they show humility. Crisis leaders are very open. They're very honest, and pretty much their humility and their authenticity allows them just to look at you, and you sense that they're not trying to fake it till they make it. What I mean by a leader of humility, I mean a person that looks at you and says, I need you to help me. I'm asking you to help me. I've often said that one of the things people need to hear from their leader is, I need you. There's something highly complimentary about asking a person's opinion or saying, hey, look, I can't make it without you. A humble leader values people, puts the people first. And again, regardless of what situation you're in, as I've talked to my leaders of all of my organizations, I've told them people first. Not money, not profits, not business, not strategy. People first. If I lose it all, if I lose everything in my life, but I've been good to the people and I've done my best to take care of the people and I've shown care to the people. I've done what's best for them, not what's best for me. Then if I lose it all, I'll be able to look at them in the eye and give them a hug and smile and say I did my best. Obviously I didn't maybe save us, but I did my best. That's essential. You've got to live. If you're a leader, you got to live with your heart. A humble leader, they ask for help. They value people. They have a servant's heart. They're constantly saying, how can I help you? And they constantly are pointing to others, giving them credit. You see, in the business community, so many times we talk about 4 things: strategy, what we must do; mission, what we want to achieve; purpose, why we're in the business; and action, let's go do it. But there's something wrong with that picture. Where are the people? The people should be right in the middle of every decision that we make. What's best for my people? The last thing I want to share with you on crisis leadership is those who do well in a crisis, they focus on constructive change. I shared with you early in the lesson that crisis moves us. And the question was, does it move us forward? Does it move us backward? Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Which way are we going? You see, crisis causes huge distraction. And what leaders do is leaders work hard. Distraction means I lost my way. I lost focus. Distraction has in it that word traction. And distraction means to pull away. Traction means to gather and to pull forward. And what leaders do is leaders during a crisis do their very best to get people back on track. One of the things I've done for 40 plus years is I've had what I call learning lunches, where every month I take someone to lunch that's bigger, better, faster, smarter, more successful than me. I don't even have lunch. I just buy their lunch and I ask them 7 questions. These lessons and these lunches have been invaluable to my personal development and growth. One of the questions I ask them is what's the most important lesson that you've ever learned in your life? I love that question. And when they give me the answer, I've asked it hundreds of times. And when they give me the answer of where they got the most important lesson in life, they don't give me the same lesson, but they go to the same place in their life. Every time, 100%, when I said, what's the most important lesson you ever learned? 100% of the time, they'll go and they'll take me to a very dark period of their life. Failures, mistakes, problems, adversity. They'll take me to a deep valley in their life. And they will share with me that was in that very difficult experience that they learned the most important lesson they've ever learned. I've never one time had somebody say, well, the most important lesson I ever learned was when I was on top of the mountain and everything was going incredibly well. I was making a lot of money and the business was growing. I've never one time had them tell me that's where the most important lesson they learned. Listen to me, my friend. My name is John. I'm your friend. Wisdom is always extracted from adversity. So when you hear a person that has great maturity, great wisdom, deep thought, it comes out of a deep valley. So when I ask that question at the lunch, what's the most important lesson you learned? I don't know what lesson they're going to teach me. I know that it's going to help me, but I know where the lesson comes from. It comes from their biggest disappointments and their darkest days. So I just now talk to you for the next couple of minutes from my heart. The question I ask myself, but the question I hope that you're asking yourself is, since I'm going through this deep valley, and since this is a very difficult time for me, for you, for all of us, where are the opportunities? What lessons am I learning right now? This is huge. The other day, I was going through again, what lessons am I learning during this dark time? And one of the things I wrote down was the fact that a leader never has the luxury of having all the answers. That just about the time I think as a leader that I've really developed my leadership and I got the leadership game down, a crisis hits and the playbook's gone. Now I've got to, that pre-game plan and leadership, it's all tossed out the window. Now I've got to have some halftime adjustments. In fact, in a crisis, you have to adjust every minute. You can't even wait for halftime. Halftime's too far away. But I just sat there and I thought to myself, no matter how good a leader we are, no matter how much we know leadership, and people look at me as quote an expert in leadership, whatever that means. Here's what I know: that it takes a crisis one more time to help me to understand that life is beyond me. There are questions that I do not have answers for. And I consider it to be very grounding to me. It makes me depend on others, the team, because I'm a person of faith, it makes me depend more on God. In fact, it's during these kind of crises that I just wish everybody had faith, faith grounded in God. And again, I'm not at all trying to put this over on you, but I can tell you that when I see friends really struggle, sometimes I just reach out to them and I just say to them, wow, I wish you had my faith right now, because I have peace that perhaps you don't have. I've got strength that I'm not sure is yours. Joy. Yeah. So I just want to say to you that there's a whole bunch of bad stuff happening to me right now. In fact, if I put my list down, it's probably about 50 to 1. Bad things versus good things. But here's what I know. When I put down the good thing that's happening to me right now during this very difficult time, it's not the number of items on my sheet that determines whether I'm having a good day or a bad day. It's the weight of those items. And the 50 things on the bad column that just aren't going well for me right now, just like, hey, they're not going well for you either. They're not going well for any of us. We're all in the same boat. There may be a hole at the other end, but we're in the same boat. Okay, the bad things, there may be 50 items. And maybe over on my left, under the good, there's just one item. But let me tell you something. The one good thing that's happening to me weighs more than the 50 bad things. It's not how many answers you have, good or bad. It's the power of the answer. It's the strength of the answer. And that one good thing in my life is helping to me cope with all the 50 bad things, 51 bad things, how many ever you have. I just want to say to you that I care for you. that I'm doing this for you because I just hope that it helps. That whatever you think of me, think of me as your friend, because I am. I value you greatly.
Always make your gratitude greater than your success. Always make your gratitude greater than your success. Increased gratitude is essential for lifetime growth. Only a small percentage of people are continually successful over the long run. These outstanding few recognize that every success comes from the assistance of many other people, and they are continually grateful for this support. Conversely, many people whose success stops at some point are in that position because they have cut themselves off from everyone who has helped them. They view themselves as the sole source of their achievements, and as they become more self-centered and isolated, they lose their creativity and ability to succeed. Continually acknowledge others, their contributions, and you will automatically create room in your mind and in the world for your greater success. You will be motivated to achieve even more for those who have helped you. Focus on appreciating and thanking others, and the conditions will always grow to support your increasing success. And I put it another way here in your notes. What we appreciate appreciates. Wow. Gets better. What we depreciate depreciates. We see the value in people and things through proactive gratitude. Once we see this value, we naturally treat these people and things with greater respect. People want to work with people who appreciate them. I underline this statement. Resources are drawn to where they are valued most. The world responds to gratitude by making more of everything we appreciate available to us. I had lunch the other day with a fellow named Rob. So when I went into the restaurant where we were going to eat, he was talking to a friend of his, and as I came in, I could tell that he had great value to that person, and so he introduced her to me and said, John, Kathy has really contributed to me, and said some very nice things, and off she went. And so we sat down for lunch, and he looked at me and he said, John, I'm practicing your book. And I said, well, that's good. I said, tell me what practice it was. I knew what he was talking about. He was talking about 25 ways to win with people, and one of the things I say is compliment people in front of other people. I was just practicing your book. And I looked at him and I said, Rob, I saw it, and that makes me feel good that you practice the book. I said, just practice it every day. Listen, there's something about expressing gratitude to people that is essential, not only for them to hear, but for you to give. Those who add to us draw us to them, and those who subtract cause us to withdraw. Gratitude by its very nature also automatically works to eliminate three mental characteristics that most undermine individual success in an interactive world. Number one is isolation. Number two is egotism. And number three is arrogance. Henry Ward Beecher said, a proud man is seldom a grateful man, for he never thinks he gets what he deserves. Or, the more you complain, the less you'll obtain. That works, doesn't it? Oprah Winfrey said, keep a grateful journal. Every night list 5 things that happened this day that you're grateful for. What we'll begin to do is change your perspective of your day and your life. If you can learn to focus on what you have, you will always see that the universe is abundant and you will have more. If you concentrate on what you don't have, you'll never have enough. If you learn to appreciate more of what you already have, you'll find yourself having more to appreciate. How true it is. I love the story of an immigrant shopkeeper whose son came to him one day complaining. He said, Dad, I don't understand how you run this store. You keep your accounts payable in a cigar box, your accounts receivable are on the spindle, and all your cash is in the register. He said, you're never going to know what your profits are. And the immigrant shopkeeper father said to him, son, let me tell you something. When I arrived in this land, all I owned was the pants I was wearing. Now your sister's an art teacher, your brother's a doctor, you're a CPA. Your mother and I own a house and a car and this little store. Add that all up and subtract the pants, and that is your profit. be grateful.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. What a short teaching from John, but what a powerful point. Doesn't take long sometimes to remind us what we as leaders need to do. You know, Tracy, you know this about me because we get to share it, but every year, there is this favorite time of the year that I have. Drum roll, what do you think it is? I know some of you, you're like Christmas, Easter, you're like Valentine's Day. That's a pretty good one. I like that. I like Stephanie's birthday. That's always fun for us. But for me, my favorite holiday every year is Thanksgiving. In fact, this past Thanksgiving in 2021, Kimberly, my executive partner, and I, we did something that was very unique. We found somebody on our team every day to send a note of gratitude to. Tracy, you were one of them. Just this text that let people know we're grateful, why we're grateful, and what we hope to do together because of gratitude. And so today I just came back and I appreciate our podcast team so much because it is no coincidence that May, the first podcast of May, is a reminder that yes, we're 6 months. We're the furthest point that we could possibly be from 2021's November and 2022's November, and yet it's still a good month to practice gratitude. And so whether you're viewing the podcast on YouTube or whether you're listening on your favorite podcast recorder, here is the ultimate standout statement. Here's the theme of what we're trying to do, and that is this. Gratitude is a choice. It's a choice on the fourth Thursday of Thanksgiving or fourth Thursday of November in the U.S. It's a choice on the first Wednesday of May around the world. Will you be a leader that practices gratitude? And Tracy, this is the perfect co-host because I've watched you through the years never take an opportunity to stand along myself or John with anything more than a first thing to do is express gratitude. Now let's get busy. And you do that, and I love that.
Oh, well, thank you, Mark, because I feel like, we're drawn to one another, aren't we? We tend to be drawn to, like brings like to it. And so what I love about the kickoff of this, and when John was talking about the gentleman who we met with who said, I'm practicing your book. And that's really what we all do, is John is such a person who's so grateful, so thankful. Even when something goes wrong, John finds something to be thankful or grateful about. And I've seen the same in you. It's not that you're covering up the bad thing or the wrong thing that's happening, but it's an attitude of finding something to be grateful for in that moment that actually buoys your spirit in that moment and the people around you. And you are really good about that. So it's kind of finding a way to laugh at the situation that you're in and turning it around. And wouldn't you say that is really the reason, one of the main reasons, I would say, perhaps the most reason that why you went from being a telesales marketer in Maxwell Leadership companies to being in the position that you are as the CEO, as the one who is championing this whole mission of moving what John started so many years ago forward and bringing all of us with you, is because of your attitude of gratitude. You really did practice what was in John's books and bringing us forward. And the root of that is really your attitude, having an attitude of gratitude.
It's funny that you bring this up because John and I were in Columbia, South Carolina at Columbia University just a little while ago. And we had the privilege of blowing the dust off of a book. In fact, I'm going to put it in the show notes, Jake, because the book is 360-Degree Leader. In fact, I'm doing something so off script right now. If you will go pick that book up, we're going to give you 15% off of that book. In fact, if you'll go to maxwellpodcast.com/gratitude, we'll put it in the show notes of how you can get that 15% discount. But John and I blew the dust off of that book because they asked us to teach on 360. How do you influence up? How do you influence at the peer level? How do you influence to people that report to you? And Tracy, as we were getting to co-teach that content the other day, I realized that every group needs to start. If you want to grow influence with any group, those above you, those around you, those that report to you, if you want to gain influence, it needs to start with gratitude. Are you thankful for the people, the role of the people above you? And you know, the answer to many leaders that are aspiring leaders is no. They found out all the fault, all the challenge with those leaders, rather than being grateful for the journey they took to get where they are. And we look at our peers as competitors, don't we? Oh, if I can just do a little bit better than the other sales manager, or if I can do a little bit better than this other person in the organization, I'll get a quicker promotion, a bigger promotion. And so we see them as competitors rather than teammates. And then finally, we take for granted those that help us as leaders get where we're supposed to be all the time. I feel like, Tracy, to your point, I'm going to come back to it. If we could just infuse more gratitude, we would grow the level or the capacity of our influence to the people in these circular environments of ecosystems around us. So yes, just the other day I got to be with my good friend David Hoyt. David was the leader that gave me my first chance to be that telesales representative you were talking about, and back in the year 2000. Man, it feels like a long time ago. And Tracy, my first thing to him to say was the exact same thing I try to say to him every time it's been a while since I've seen him. David, thank you for giving me a chance. Mm-hmm. I say that to John. Just got back from, like I said, Columbia, South Carolina, and I looked at him on the flight back, and I just went, John, thanks for letting me share the stage with you today. And his response was, oh, Mark, you deserve it. You should be up there. And I go, no, don't know that I deserve it. Don't know that I should be, but I sure am grateful that I am. And it's this whole concept. I never want to lose that, because I think losing the gratitude begins to lose the ability to see that others are the biggest part of our success. Hey, Simon, I want to go to you first for the next question. It's from Dominic from St. Louis. And by the way, if you're watching, go to the chat box, list a question. We want to get your question in front of Simon and John Maxwell. This question from Dominic, St. Louis says, what is the best way for a leader to break out of a short-term mindset and embrace a mindset better suited for the infinite game?
Well, the mindset is the infinite mindset. The way to break out of it is to actually sit down and say, what game am I in? Being in the infinite game is not the absence of finite games. It's the context within which the finite games exist. And we use the wrong metaphors and analogies to describe our lives, our businesses. And so most of the metaphors that we use reinforce the finite mindset. We use sports analogies all the time. We use war analogies all the time. This is a campaign. We're launching this, it's fourth and goal, and we have to, this is how we talk to our teams about making, the end of the year numbers or something. And the reality is the analogies are all wrong, because these are games that have no finish lines. These are infinite games. And so we have to change our mentality of how it's playing. And I like to think of it more like lifestyle. So for example, like being healthy, you can absolutely have finite goals. I want to lose X amount of weight by X date. It's a finite number. I mean, it's an arbitrary number and an arbitrary date, just like we said, arbitrary financial goals for arbitrary dates. Same thing, right? Sales goals, all of it's all arbitrary, right? And we like numbers. Metrics are really important. It helps people feel like they're making progress. You could never run a marathon without mile markers, because it's unnerving. And we have to remember, metrics are there to help us understand speed and distance, but they don't indicate the end of the game. It's speed and distance. And so it's wonderful, and we weigh ourselves every day, and we're exercising, we're eating right, and we can see the weight come off. And if we hit our goal, we feel excited. And here's the worst part. You have to keep exercising and eating healthy for the rest of your life, because the game does not end. Congratulations, you hit your goal. Now you have to keep going and going and going. It's a different mind frame, different mindset. Also, what happens if you miss your goal? You know what happens if you miss your goal? Nothing. Nothing happens if you miss your goal. It was arbitrary. But if you've been eating healthy and exercising, the odds are you'll hit that goal in a month or so. You're fine. In fact, you're probably way healthier now than when you started. because the metrics were there. The finite game is there to help you make progress in the infinite game. That's the role of the finite game. That's the role of many of those finite games. The infinite game is the context within which those finite games exist. But if we don't have vision, if we don't have a cause, if we don't have a place that we're trying to go to, then the only thing we have are the finite things. The only thing we have are those finite metrics. And that's why we become so obsessed with them, because that's all we've got.
Wow.
That's all we've got. And so you want to have that distant view of a more idealized state of the world, which is different than a BHAG, different than a big, hairy, audacious goal. This is not achievable in 25 years. This is not achievable in your lifetime. All men are created equal. 240 years, still not there, right? But all of the milestones that we pass, we're trying to get there, and all of them are imperfect. But you can see a nation struggling to get somewhere. It's the same at a micro level. To have a vision of service, to have a vision of a world, the way John talks about his business, the way John talks about his work, and all of the things he's doing are the micro games, the finite games that help him measure progress towards this grander thing. And by the way, that is what gives our lives and our work meaning. That the finite metrics actually are adding up towards something bigger.
Oh, that's good stuff. Can I pitch for? Everybody? If you're on, you've got to get Simon's book, The Infinite Game. I'm telling you, you got to get it. and the reason you have to get it is I've read every one of your books, Simon. Okay.
Thank you, John.
I truly think this is, to me, now every book speaks to you based on where you are. So when somebody says it's a great book, it became great because that what was said in that book is coming right up to where I am personally. The Infinite Game was incredible because when I started off, I was goal oriented. And so I laid out my goals. In fact, my first personal growth kit was goals and how to set goals. And so I did. And it was kind of like, how long will it take? How long will it take? How long will it take? And one day in my personal growth, because of the changes happening in me, I went from how long will it take to how far can I go? And that was my first introduction to the Infinite Game. All of a sudden I realized, oh my. And then I began to understand there really is no finish line. That the metrics are finishing are not finishing lines. They're indicators of how far you've gone. But if you have a finish line, if you play a finite game and that's all you have don't have the bigger infinite game. The problem is when you cross the finish line, as you know, Simon, you're finished. I mean, it's over. And how many times do we see people? They've already died. They just haven't made it official. You know what I'm talking about? I mean,
you see this in companies, right? We want to be the biggest. We want to be number one. So what happens if you achieve that? Do you shut the doors? You've accomplished your goal. Shut the doors. The game is over.
That's exactly right.
So true.
Hey, John, I want to hear.
You want to get that book. Make sure they get the book, Mark.
Thank you, John.
They want to get it.
My dad had no quit in him. He didn't. What he set his mind to do, he stayed right on track. And it was something that I watched in him, and it's something that I admired, because what happened is, because he had no quit in him, I watched my father handle difficult days and adversity in a very successful way. And what that did for me is, when I began to be, as a leader, hit with the tough times, the one thing that never entered my mind was to quit. Maybe it entered my mind that I ought to create and find a better way. Maybe it entered my mind that I needed to have some people come alongside and help me so that we could maybe together get through a dark time. Maybe it entered my mind that I needed to ask some questions so that I could better be ready to stay in the game. But it never entered my mind to quit. Why? Because I never saw my father quit. I saw my father understand that at the end of the day, the person that wins is the one that stays in the game. Now, that had such an impression on me as a kid. Now, you have to go back to 1972, 73. Now, I'm pastor. I'm doing pretty well, and I'm still living out the lessons that Dad taught me and was teaching me at that time. And I'll never forget, I got into a real tough stretch at my congregation. And to be honest with you, it was wearing me out. And for the first time, I was 28. For the first time, I thought, maybe I ought to quit. Maybe I ought to just let this one go.
And then I remembered my dad and his example. One of his favorite expressions is just keep on keeping on, son. Keep on keeping on. There was no quitting, keep on keeping on, that's for sure. And so I can still remember the day in my office I picked up the old thick Webster's Dictionary. Now you can talk about, hey, those were the days. Hey, remember the days when you had encyclopedias? Remember the days we didn't have all this technology and all the wonderful advances we have today? So I took my old Webster Dictionary and I went to the Q section and I got to the word quit. And I took my scissors and I cut it out of the dictionary. I literally, in fact, I don't have that old dictionary today, obviously, but boy, I wish I did. In fact, I did. I'd bring show and tell and I'd show you, because at the age of what would have been the age of about 27, 28, I just cut the word out of the dictionary and I just basically didn't even recognize it as a worthwhile word. Where did I get that? From my dad. He was a 100%er. No quit in him. When everybody else was kind of considering it, my dad was head on, game on, staying right with the task. That is a tremendous lesson that I have in my life today, because leadership gets very difficult and there are times when you just say, wow, I'm worn out. Now, my father did teach me to take a break. He did teach me to rest. He did teach me that sometimes you got to back off enough to kind of refuel and re-nourish yourself. But there was no quit in him. I'm grateful for that lesson that he taught me. Another lesson that I learned from my father, my gosh, what a huge lesson this one was. This one has stayed with me throughout my life. They all have, but my father, he introduced me to How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. As you know, my father picked out books for me to read when I was a kid. And if you've read How to Win Friends and Influence People, I assume you have. Hello. Can you really go through life and not read that book? You didn't go back and do it, and you shortchanged yourself and you shortchanged the people that you were trying to help. He said, don't go that way. He said, why would you go do something twice when you can do it best once? And so and again, being a person of faith, my father would believe that excellence began because that brought glory to God. If you travel, especially in Europe, you look at some of the great old buildings, they'll have the expression, year it was built, and then for the glory of God, for the glory of God. And they basically try to live their life and build their buildings as a masterpiece of excellence to honor their Creator. And my father just believed that with all of his heart. And so therefore, whenever we did something, we knew that we didn't do it half-heartedly. We didn't tiptoe through the tulips. We had to be all in, dive in, and do our very best. And that is something that I'm so appreciative of in my life today. I can still remember when I was a young leader, after I, went into my first church, and I realized that I was naturally a kind of a connecting, charismatic kind of communicator, and I realized that I was good at it. In fact, I was speaking in a farming community with only 30 people, and to be honest with you, those farmers were just glad to have a little time that they weren't doing chores. And so they loved me. And I realized very quickly that I could get up and I could just maybe study for 30 minutes and I could preach a message and they would all be happy. And so I asked myself, well, what am I going to do? Am I just going to do that and kind of wing it and get passing grades? Or am I going to really work for it? And I went into a few months of, do I wing it or do I work for it? And I'm so glad I went back to my father. And I realized his teaching stayed with me. I can't wing it. I've got to do my best. So I literally started writing every sermon out so that I would be clear in my thinking and so that I wouldn't repeat myself. And I started that habit. For 25 years, I wrote out every sermon, word for word. It was an incredible discipline. And it also helped me to realize I've got to give best effort and I've got to get best return for this. My father really developed that excellence line. And he always said to me, son, he said, remember this, you set your own bar of excellence. Don't let someone else set it for you. In fact, he said, if someone else sets the bar of excellence for you and their excellence is higher than yours, then you've set the wrong bar. He said, you should have such a high expectation of what you do that no one else has that high expectation. So you not only want to meet expectations, you want to exceed expectations. I've done teaching on exceeding expectations. You see, only 15% of the people even meet expectations. Only 5% exceed them. And my dad understood that if you exceed expectations, if you do your best always, you'll set yourself apart from the rest of the crowd. And that's absolutely life-changing. It's huge. Wow. Dad, I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful for you, for all that I learned from you. And then he taught me to grow and better myself. He taught me that unknown to me at the age of, or when I got to the 7th grade, of him putting books in my hands and paying me my allowance to read books. Life-changing for me. Life-changing for my family.
Welcome to the Maxwell Leadership Executive Podcast, where our goal is to help you increase your reputation as a leader, increase your ability to influence others, and increase your ability to fully engage your team to deliver remarkable results.